Jaber. Thank you for coming to this town hall meeting tonight. I'm a proud resident of Orland Park for over 16 years, and I'm a special education teacher for 15 years teaching students who have learning struggles. For more than 15 years, I continue to advocate for the rights not only of our students, but also of our homeowners. Last July, we learned that the Village of Orland Park failed to file the 2 annual financial audits, which are required each year, that detail the financial health of our village or city. I've been following the village on the proposed tax increment finance, and I felt like this was the only way to educate homeowners and taxpayers of the impact this may have on Orland Park financially. Today's meeting is to help homeowners and taxpayers in Orland Park like you to understand what is a tax increment finance and how it's used. TIF districts are not designed for a village like Orland Park. It was designed to help struggling communities, and I believe Orland Park is not a struggling community. I will continue to stand up for the rights of the taxpayers in Orland Park. Now I'm going to introduce our guest speaker tonight, Tom Tresser, who is a recognized authority of TIF districts. Tom Tresser, everyone. Thank you, Mark. And I'm sorry, I want to introduce a few guests that we have. John Lavelle, Assistant Superintendent, District 230, Business Services. Chuck Agostiniak, School Board Member, District 140. Nadine Scordro, School Board Member, District 230. Ray Hanania from Suburban Chicagoland. And Mike Nolan from the Daily Southtown.
Okay, thanks a lot. Well, good evening, everybody. Hope everybody is well and safe and sane in these crazy civic times. My name is Tom Tresser. I call myself a civic educator and public defender. So let that sink in. You can say, hey, he doesn't look like a lawyer. No, it's the word public that I stand for as an educator and I guess you could say activist and organizer. And so I'm just trying to disclose a little bit to you about who's this guy who's standing in front of you. My mother was a public school teacher in New York City. My wife was a public school teacher in Massachusetts, and I was on the school board of an elementary school in Chicago where I lived, even though we don't have any children. Public education is a big deal in my household, and it's part of my pedagogy and my, I guess you could say, civic beliefs, that if it has the word public in front of it, I love it. It's important, and I believe it's critical for our country, for our communities, whatever your politics are, wherever you live, this word public is super critical. And so that's a belief I disclose to. The other is, I believe in government, okay? I believe that government could cause problems, but also government can solve them. And so, if I believe that, I sort of have to believe in government, that government can work. In this case, we're talking about your village, but it's also the state and the nation. But in order for that to happen, we need to trust it. And you know, in the founding of this country, the founders assumed that we would all take active roles in our communities. They assumed in drafting of this nation that the average people, just like you sitting in this room today, you have the responsibility and the right to get involved in the public life of your community, to lead, not necessarily run for office, but potentially, yes. We have some people who are serving, and that's fantastic. My hat is off to all office holders who are giving up their private lives and their family lives to serve the people. And the founders all wanted that. They wanted, in those days it was the farmer, to put down the plow and go and write laws and then return, to the field. And in that image, I believe it, and that the average person should take a role and an interest in their government, whether it's the local government, the state government, whatever, and have an opinion, an informed opinion, and then do something. Like if you like it, rah. If you don't like it, boo. And then do something. You vote, you run for office, you complain, you write a letter. All this is America. This is what we're supposed to be doing. So I believe that, and as part of that belief, and the founders thought this too, you gotta be smart. You gotta know stuff, right? And part of the stuff that you gotta know is the money. Where's the money at? Budgets Some people are very good with numbers. I personally I struggle with numbers. My wife is the financial genius of our household. But I do believe that in order to be a smart citizen and to participate fully in public life, you kind of got to know about the money, right? And we're talking budgets, okay? Your public money, which is collected by taxes and other means, and then used by your local government to do stuff. You know, whatever they may be, the schools, the roads, the fire department, the parks. I love parks. I love libraries. You know, we didn't have a lot of money when I was growing up. And so I used the library a lot. And maybe, you know, if we stopped and just went around the room and asked people like, hey, you got kids in public school? Do you love your parks or your beaches, you know? Or tell me a story about a teacher who's changed your life. Or maybe that librarian who noticed you taking a book out, right? And the next time you went there, she had other books for you, and that person changed your life. I'm sure we'll have many, many stories like this. But you get where I'm coming from. Okay. That's just by way of introducing myself. All right, but we're here not to talk about any of that stuff, but to get into the subject matter of the TIFs of Orland Park and what is on the table. So let's get into our subject proper. I should tell you that this is something like my 246th public meeting. I'm strangely obsessed with this subject, and I hope by the end of tonight you will be too. I'm going to ask that we hold questions until the end of my remarks, but if you're just bursting to ask a question, go ahead and ask it. Mohammed over here, he's going to scribe your question, and then we can get to it later. So if you just must ask a question, ask to be recognized, and you know, Mohammed can call on you, and let's scribe your question. If you can wait, fine. I'll be done fairly soon, and then we'll have plenty of time for that. Okay, so let's get into it. As I say, this is about my 245th public meeting. We've done them all over Chicagoland and across the Midwest. These are just images from places in Berwyn, Woodstock. I've been to Detroit. I just came from Portland, Oregon. You can go to tifreports.com. And there you can find all kinds of information about the subject that we're talking about. A lot of it is behind a paywall, but a lot of it is also available. But check it out, tifreports.com. And including the presentations that I've given and the online presentations that are at SlideShare, I'd say about 290,000 people have been illuminated. So that's what we're doing here tonight. We're getting illuminated. This is the TIF Illumination Project. People are protesting TIFs all across the country. You see here Cincinnati, Baltimore, Chicago. People are, let's put it this way, there's a lot of questions about what is a TIF, and is it a good thing, a bad thing? A lot of questions, and there's a lot of civic energy around the country. So what is a TIF? It stands for Tax Increment Financing. So if you remember nothing else from our discussion tonight, it's your property taxes, people. That's kind of the basic unit of our exchange here, of our civic exchange. They're designed to spur or stimulate economic development in so-called blighted areas. The word blight is quite controversial. In many places in America, it's a loaded term that has racial overtones. That's connected to redlining and other kinds of discriminatory practices. So I use the term because that's in the statute, basically. So it's an Illinois statute that was established in the 70s that allows municipalities around the state to have TIFs. And you don't have to have TIFs, but if you wish to have them, you must follow the rules of the Illinois statute. And the statute lays out a number of conditions, I guess you could say, like a menu. And if you can satisfy 5 of these various conditions, congratulations, you're blighted. And we'll get to that in a minute. But so that's the thing to know. It's run by the city or municipality under state law. And the TIF districts that are created by this process are only for your city. So in other words, I'm in Chicago, we have quite a few, but they don't touch Evanston. So Evanston has its own TIFs, right? And so on. Wilmette has their own TIFs. And each city manages them according to their wishes
and it's a mayoral thing. So it's the Department of Development or Planning. There's always an economic development agency that would be in charge. And in Chicago, it's the Department of Planning and Development. That's who runs the TIFs. That's run by a commissioner who's appointed by the mayor. So that's pretty much how it is in every municipality. There's the mayor who has a cabinet, you know, someone who runs the streets, someone who runs the police, someone who runs economic development. And it's in that economic development department where the TIFs sit, okay? So it's a part of the mayor's portfolio. Now there's two factors to create a TIF. I said one is this idea of blight. So that's by statute. And so what happens is when a city wishes to get into the TIF business, they usually hire a consultant, and there's a few of them that make a lot of money from this, and they're able to satisfy the statute by doing the due diligence and to prove the blighting factors, and they issue a document, and that is submitted as proof of the TIF, that we can create a TIF. But there's another factor, and that's called the but-for factor. But-for is a little harder to explain and prove, but it's basically the idea that the market has fled your community. This kind of goes along with the blight, if you can follow me. So let's imagine a situation that I'm a developer, Tom Tresser Development, and I want to build a little strip mall, you know, on 113th Street. Now normally, if I wanted to have this business enterprise, I would buy that property, right? That's my risk. And I hire an architect, and we sketch it out and be like, you know, there's a florist shop, a dry cleaners, 7-Eleven, da-da-da-da-da-da, and there'll be parking and all like that, and it's gonna cost $5 million. And I would take money out of my pocket or get a construction loan from the bank, good for me. I build my little mall, and hopefully I fill it up with good tenants. The tenants prosper, people come and get their cleaning, you know, buy flowers, and they employ people, and all is well. I make my rent, good for me. Time goes by, someone makes me an offer, and I sell my development, and I make a profit. That's America, right? But what if this community or this area where I wish to build my little mall is blighted? What happens then? The bank says, Tom, I love your plan for this little mall. The thing is, these are blighted areas. These people here are problematic. They're going to steal from you. They're poor. They'll rob you, their store. They won't be able to afford the dry cleaning. So it's a risky proposition, Tom. So we can lend you the money you wish, but it'll be at 20 points because we're taking a risk. And I go, I can't possibly make that work. I'd have to charge $1 million a square foot. You know, who could be there? Tiffany's Jewelers, because the only people who can afford to rent at that level. I can't make it work. I need help. And the help comes in the form of the TIF. So if we are in a TIF district, again, this is a blighted area, and I say to the mayor of this area, Mr. Mayor, I would like to build this mall. It's going to cost $5 million. The bank can only give me so much, and then it's going to be ruinous. Can you help me? Aha, the TIF can help you up to 30%. So they could give me money to build this mall because it's in a blighted area where apparently business has fled. In other words, I can't make it work. So if I have to prove that I've tried to get the money, but it's not available, nobody will lend to me, or if they would, it's so a higher rate that it's not a feasible business. So I say it's a blighted area, right, as defined by statute, and I can't do it without some help. That's what but for. But for the public money, the project could not happen. Now I have to say that is a hard thing if it's hard to me to tell you, you imagine how hard it is to prove. But nevertheless, those are the two factors. Okay. So if you created a TIF under these conditions, it lasts for 23 years. So why 23 years? I don't know. It's a biblical age, but that is the law. And you can extend it for another 11. The thing to remember about it is it can only be used to build something. Now this is a fact that goes by people really fast, but I really want you to hold this in your mind. If you talk about economic development and you think about your community or places where you've lived or traveled, and you think about like what would make that place really great? You know, something's lacking, something's not great there. What would make it great that would make my life better or my children's life better, or happier or healthier or more secure, whatever is in your mind about the word development. And this is something worth holding on to. And if in your thinking it involves a person, like I think we need more librarians, or what a crazy idea, more public health nurses, like in a time of a pandemic. What a crazy idea that would be if our cities or our communities had more health professionals. Or you might say, I believe in sport as a way to get children out of trouble and then occupy them, so we need more coaches for our park district, or whatever, you know what I'm saying? Or librarians, back to my subject that I love so much. We want to keep our libraries open till midnight because we have a factory and people are coming out at 10 o'clock at night or whatever, and so we need our library to be open to midnight. Oh my God, what a crazy idea. So that means we need another librarian on the late shift. So if your brain goes that way, TIFs cannot help you. They cannot be used to hire human beings, only the physical place where they might work. Now, the last thing that I'll say is that the TIF money is supposed to be used in the place that it's collected. So if a TIF district is created over here and money is gathered, and I'm going to tell you about how that's gathered in a minute, it can't go down here in another part of your city. Or if, in the case of Chicago, which is quite large, you can imagine how large Chicago is, money collected in a TIF up on the top can't be used for down on the south. So it's kind of handcuffed. And that, to me, is a public policy issue, which we'll talk about in a minute. All right, so that's the basics of TIFs. Now let's talk about this increment. It's as important that we hold on to this. So this is a real TIF from the city of Chicago. And you can see the dark black lines are define the TIF district. And when that happens, the county clerk says to the Department of Planning, you created a TIF district, and inside that TIF there are a number of properties. And the county will tell the city that. And for the sake of our example, let's say there are 1,000 properties in this TIF district that we're creating for your edification. And let's say, for the sake of argument, that these 1,000 properties are throwing off $1,000 in property tax. Okay, you with me? 1,000 properties. So here's our TIF. And year 0 is 1,000 properties, and the property tax is $1,000. So, the first thing we have to pause and say is, where does that $1,000 go? So for those of you who are property owners, remember on your property tax bill, who uses property taxes? Schools. Fire department, your city, libraries. Right, so you're just remembering your property tax bill, right? And there's all these agencies. They're the guys that use your property tax dollar. Now, of course, they get money from other sources, but property taxes are a big source of running our government. Now, you can say, oh, I pay too much taxes. That's the deal, right? You chose to live in a certain place, you love this place, whatever. I love Chicago, it's expensive. That's the deal. If you think it's too much, you gotta go away, move someplace else, find a cheaper place to live. But if you like the place you live and you like the services that you're getting, this is how you're paying for it. That's the deal. Now, if you're renting, it's the same thing, right? Your money goes to the property owner, and he or she then pays, into that kitty. What's the biggest user of property taxes? Schools. That is universally true across America. It's particularly problematic for a state like Illinois. Do you know why? It's how schools are funded, but there's something about the way we collect revenue in Illinois, that's a problem. And that is, it is on a flat side. It is not a progressive income tax for the state of Illinois, which means that our school board districts rely heavily on property taxes for their funding, which is a problem because if you're in a wealthy community and you have a lot of wealthy owners and the properties are of a high value and maybe there's a shopping mall or whatever, throwing off a lot of property taxes, your schools will reflect that and they will have more money to operate. Whereas maybe 10, 20 miles away, people perfectly just as good as you are, only they're not as wealthy or well off, their houses are not that valuable perhaps, their property tax is not that much, and their schools will reflect that. So that's an inequitable thing baked into the state of Illinois, and I just mention it because it complicates the situation when we're talking about where does our property tax dollars go? Who gets their hands on them, okay? Back to the presentation. Okay, I'm saying for the sake of our argument, we've got these 1,000 properties, and they're throwing up $1,000. It's year one. The TIF now is underway. And now, it's a few years later. And that $1,000 is called a base, by the way. We need to make that very clear. It's $1,000 at the beginning. That's another thing for you to write down in your notebooks, for you'll be tested on this later, the base. So this is the famous triangle that you'll often see when you're talking about TIFs. And what is happening is, each year, the county is repeating that exercise of telling the city how much property taxes are being paid by all those properties that are inside that TIF district that I showed you. Now I said at the beginning, before the TIF district was created, it's $1,000. But let's say it's year 5. Okay, we're 5 years into the TIF. So here we are, year number 5. And now, because values have gone up in this little area that we've created, and there's new construction. See, there's new construction, they weren't on the property rolls before. So now, this new construction is 100% being captured by the TIF. So let's say, in year 5, the property taxes now are $4,000. What's the difference between 4 and 1? 3,000. That's the increment. You with me? That $3,000 over the base is what the TIF captures. That's the increment. Okay, now we're 10 years into the TIF, so we're here. You're 10 or 15. Things have continued to improve in this area. So here we are, year 15, and now this area has gotten a lot of growth. There's another thing got built, and so forth and so on. The existing properties have been increasing in value, so it's very good for those people. Now they're collecting $10,000. What's the difference between this and this? Oh, this is a good crowd. $9,000 is the increment. You get me? And so on for every year for 23 years, right? At the 23rd year, that's the change in color, get to this gold part. The TIF now expires, and all the property taxes inside the district are now flowing to those units of government that we just illuminated a few minutes ago. The schools, the parks, the libraries. So for 23 years, that $1,000 hasn't changed. It's flat. What's the problem with that? What's the problem? Yeah, I mean, have prices gone up in 23 years? Is a box of chalk going to cost the same? Is a football? Is a salary? You know, obviously not. So this is a bit of a problem that I'm going to address a little later in the presentation. But this is basically how the increment works. Every year, this operation happens. Now, the money that's down here, the base, that flows into your, I guess you say, your budget, your budgetary process. It finds its way into the operation of the units of government that we mentioned, the schools, the parks, the county, etc. But what about this money here? Where does that go? That goes into the TIF district. So I say that is off the books. This money is on the books. This money is off the books. And it is not really amenable to a budgeting process, which is a problem for those of you that believe in good government and government accountability. It's a little sketchy, and as we're going to discover tonight, fraught with mystery. But yet, so look, think of it this way. Each TIF district has a bank account, and that's where that money goes. So it's not part of the budgeting process, and it's not there for the firemen or whatever. It's in the TIF district to be used as the mayor sees fit. Now in the city of Chicago, as I mentioned, for every dollar of property tax, These are the people that use that money. And as I mentioned, the Board of Education is the biggest user at 56 cents per dollar. This is the city of Chicago. In other words, for every dollar that's collected of property tax, this is supposed to, how it's to be distributed, and that's what it would say on your bill should you own a property in the city of Chicago. Except if you're in a TIF district. What happens then is Mr. TIF takes his off the top, and then the units of government get what's left. It's not unlike Vegas, should the mob ever come to the casino. You've seen those movies, haven't you? The casino is run by someone from New York. He calls into the manager and says, how did we do? The guy from the casino says, oh, we took in $1 million. Fantastic. The guy from the New York owner goes, oh, that's a great night. He doesn't know that they took in $1 million too. But Mr. Casino guy, he's put $200,000 in his closet. It never makes it to New York. In a way, TIFs do the same thing. They eat first. And these are some of the factors that make TIFs happen. As I mentioned, this is the menu from the state legislature. Age, obsolescence, code violations, excessive vacancies, and overcrowding of facilities. However, as I'll tell you in a minute, it's a very elastic definition, and when they made LaSalle Street, which is our Wall Street, right, a TIF district, they found cracked sidewalks and used that as definition of blight, and also some of the office towers were 20 to 30% vacant, excessive vacancies. So I'm going to suggest to you that the definition of blight is, shall we say, elastic. And it will allow any place in the state of Illinois to be TIF'd, virtually. Now, here's a little bit about Chicago before we get to where we are today. In 2023, Chicago had 124 TIF districts, and you can see them all across discolored spots, and that they touch. And this is because the law allows money to move from one TIF to another if they touch. It's called porting. Overall, in the whole county of Cook, in the suburbs, there's another 309 TIF districts. So that's a total of 433 for the Cook County, and they're across 98 municipalities. So you got Chicago plus 97 other municipalities. So this is a widespread practice, and you have one here as well. And it's a big deal, obviously. So this is we're not talking about something that's unique to you or Chicago or Evanston. This is a thing that's happening all across the state and many, many other states. Now you can see the growth in Chicago's TIFs over the years. You can see the purple on the left and the purple on the right. So this is a growing thing. Mayors love these things. And since we're in the season of the haunting and the pumpkin time, I love the image here of the Frankenstein monster. You know the story of the Frankenstein monster, right? The scientist cooks up the thing from the dead body parts, and he's gonna bring it back to life, and his assistant goes, "But master, this is terrible. This is blasphemy." And he goes, "Don't worry about it, Igor. I have it under control." And then he pulls the switch. What happens? The monster comes to life. He breaks the scientist's back, runs out, and sets the village on fire. It's that image of our creation getting out of control. And so it is with TIFs in Chicago. 124 TIFs active last year. They pulled $1.2 billion. Oh my gosh. Let the record show that people's mouths dropped open across the room. They go, what the heck? $1.2 billion in property taxes did not make it to the units of government that needed them to operate in my city. They spent $410 million in the city of Chicago. And since TIFs came to Chicago, they've taken $12.4 billion off the table. And I've made it my business to try to find out what happened to that money. I think it's a really great question. I've been trying to get the newspapers to write about it, but except from this guy right here, no major Chicago paper will cover this work. Go figure. This is the growth in TIFs across Cook County, and you can see, again, it's a huge growth industry. Up, and up. And even though the number of TIFs go down, up and down, the money collected by them rises. Again, this is Chicago, and you can think, well, Chicago is a wealthy place, there's a lot of properties. how does that reflect for our community? And we're gonna get to that in a second. And back to the monster movies, Godzilla trashing Tokyo. The biggest thing that we do at the TIF Illumination Project for the places that we work with is to show them how much money is in the TIF accounts at the end of the year that's just sitting there. That's, property taxes. And as I said, there's 124 TIF districts in Chicago, so you can guess it's a big number. And when I get to this point in presentations, I ask the people, have they heard of this number before? We're not in Chicago, so I'm gonna guess the answer is no. But the number for Chicago, at the end of 2023, there was $3 billion sitting in the TIF districts accounts. Now the mayor, my mayor just this morning gave his 2025 budget address. He said we're hemorrhaging money. He's gonna wanna put a 4.5% property tax raise on us. And I'm saying, hold the phone, Mayor. What about that money? That's our property taxes sitting in bank account somewhere. So before you hit me up for another 5%, let's have a conversation about this money. Of course, he's not taking my calls. I don't know what, but when I get to this point in the presentation, when we're in the city of Chicago, there's like a gasp, there's a groan, there's a moan, there's like a what the F? Are you kidding me? There's all kinds of reactions, and you can imagine how that might be, okay? So this is the biggest number that we reveal, and it's important because unless you have a conversation about that number, I don't really think you can get to the bottom line for your city. Like, that's how I started my talk to you, is like being smart about your civic money. You must kind of follow this. All right, across the whole state of Illinois, it's huge. 1,453 TIF districts for the whole state of Illinois, across 534 municipalities, of which you are one. $2.3 billion removed in 2023, about half of that came from Chicago. And since TIFs were created in the state of Illinois, it was $32 billion have been removed. Now again, we had the same conversation at the state level as we had at our city level. Like, is the state broke? Are we forcing to give concessions to our retirees and making them give up their benefits? Those of you that might be in the public sector or retirees or no retirees know that this was a big deal a few years ago, where the public sector employees were told to give back their benefits. I'm sorry, we can't afford nurse person or construction worker or whatever, clerical worker. I know you came on board in the 80s and you signed a contract and all like that, and we promised your benefits as you retired out of the state service, but you know what? We can't really give you that, and so we're gonna have to ask you to walk back. And that was a big conversation. It was a union thing, it was a political thing, it was all kinds of conversations in the newspapers and everything, except this number was never mentioned. So had I been, I don't know if anybody had asked me, or if I was the governor for a day or something, I would have said, well, we really can't ask those retirees to give up anything until we talk about this number. $32 billion across the whole state. Okay. What about the whole country? Well, as I asserted, they're in 49 states. We don't really know how big a deal it is, but I'm going to estimate that there's 40,000 TIFs across the country. They pull out $40 billion a year. So now all of a sudden, we're not just talking about the situation in Orland Park or even my city in Chicago. We're talking about something that's a very big deal indeed, and we are all part of this story. Now, since, as I say, the Board of Education in our school districts are supposed to get 50 to 60 cents of the dollar, that's why the little school child is very sad. Because I would assert that because of this TIF business, American public education is losing on the order of $20 billion a year, every single year. It's probably much worse than that. All right, there are a few TIF problems, and we're heading into the home stretch here. TIFs starve local government. So as I asserted to you beginning, with that flat base, the TIF coffers are filling up, but they're not helping the fire department or the schools or the library for 23 years. So that's why we need to be mindful. If somebody's saying, I want to use a TIF money to do something with it, they better have a really good argument for why they're taking the money away from the units of government that deserve it or should get that money in the first place. And there should be a conversation with you, the taxpayers, especially if you've got kids in schools or love public education or aligned in any way with public services. It should be a very open and frank conversation. So this is you can't see this, this is your property tax bill from Orland Park, and yours is even more pronounced than mine in the sense that here's the schools portion, it's 67% of your property tax bill. You knew this, right? So from $1 of your property tax in this village, 67 cents or 67.4 cents is supposed to go to your public education. That's the deal, that's how it works here. And you can see the other units of government are all on here. Again, if you signed in, you'll be emailed this deck and it'll be very clear to you. I know it's a little hard to see. But the thing to remember is, that's the other side of the balance sheet, right? You take $1 off the table to make something happen, this is the consequence. And in Chicago, as I said, you know, this is the pie of property taxes. They take about, and this would be in Cook County, overwide, TIFs take about 4.3% of all the property taxes collected in Cook County. So it's a pretty significant thing that we're speaking of. Now, what if TIFs didn't exist? Cook County Assessor Fritz Kagi had his data scientists run the numbers, and this is what they came up with. If there were no TIFs in the county of Cook, your property taxes would plummet 15%. 15%. So what does that mean? How is that possible? Well, think about it. The units of government give their budgets to the county, you know, so you have the sheriff and the county and all the different units of government, right? This is how much money we need to operate. And they calculate, well, how many properties are there in Cook County that we can tax and extract money and then pay the bills. But if a TIF takes a property off the tax rolls, as I've demonstrated that it does, there are less properties to tax. And so what happens? The rates inch up. The people who run our use of government know this game very well. And so what Fritz has told us is that inflation, the pressure, calculates at 15% across the county. So if you want to think about something, and think about how much you paid in property taxes over 10 years, right? Whatever that number is, take 15% of that. What if you had that in your pocket right now? Oh my God. That's a college education, that's a boat, that's your dream vacation to Tahiti or whatever, you know what I'm saying? That's your grandson's whatever, endowment. But instead it was sucked up in this way. So this is a property that they ran the numbers on. It's in Pilsen, and this is how much they paid in 2021. They paid $9,000, and then they ran the numbers and said, what if there were no TIFs at all? Then it goes down, minus 15%. So this is just, again, this is in the deck, and you can see a real property with a real address from the Pilsen community, and they ran the numbers, and they just demonstrate that this one home, 15% less they would be paying year in and year out. All right, so I would assert to you a few of the policy issues. The definition of blight is meaningless. These are places that receive TIF money in my city. As I said, LaSalle Street, $842 million have been spent on office high-rises, you know, big construction projects owned by giant corporations like Tishman Spear and so on. This Mariano's in Greektown received $7 million to develop it, and this is, you know, it's a very prosperous part of Chicago if you've ever been to Greektown. You know, let me put it this way, if I blindfolded you and dropped you in Greektown and took the blindfold off and said, does this look blighted to you? I don't think they'd say, no, it looks pretty happening, you know? And yet, that's what happened. And then in my community, there's something called the Grossinger Superstore, so it was an old warehouse that got renovated with $8.5 million, but that's across the street from the Apple Store. And also across the street from Steppenwolf, which is the hottest theater in America. By no way is that area blighted, yet they did prove it out, you know, when they created the TIF. So these are just 3 examples. There are many, many more I could share with you. 2 projects in Chicago particularly make me crazy. One is called Lincoln Yards, that got got $1.1 billion in TIFs, and the other is Project 78, another billion plus. So these are just two projects. They're called like mini cities or mega developments. Together, $2.4 billion in subsidies, of which $800 million are finance fees. So that's just money given to Wall Street just out of pure profit. Mayor Lightfoot and now Mayor Johnson wants to give TIF money to some of those same office buildings that I mentioned to you earlier that are now standing vacant because of COVID, and they want to convert some of those office buildings into high-end residential, and they're going to use TIF money, $110 million for a select number of projects. So they get it coming and going. All right, this is Chicago again. Again, it's a long, sad story. But not too far from here, in the city of Aurora, the village there approved a $50 million TIF to the Hollywood Casino Company to move their casino from the south part of Aurora to the north side. $50 million in subsidy. This is a company that put in $6 billion in revenue. They don't need any help, but they got it. They also got free land, and also the city's gonna have to pay another bunch of millions to reconfigure roads and something to fit the property. So all in, Aurora is $80 million to subsidize the new casino, okay? Again, I find it controversial, but there really wasn't a big debate there. There was one alderman who opposed it. They were like stoning him every time he was making questions, but that's the reality in Aurora. TIFs also, I believe, are corrupting influence. So what happens when a developer who wishes to seek TIF money gives a campaign contribution to the elected officials of that jurisdiction? Conflict of interest? Legal? Very typical in Illinois. I would say it kind of muddies the water, let's just say that. In Chicago, these are examples of aldermen who have TIFs in their districts and projects that were put in the districts that received TIF money that gave these guys campaign contributions. Carrie Austin is indicted and has heading to prison. Walter Burnett, that's the alderman of the Marianos area. He's not indicted, he's not going anywhere. Danny Solis wore a wire for the FBI for 2 years. He seems to be sort of on the razor's edge. We don't know what's happening to him. And then Brian Hopkins took $6,000 from the Lincoln Yards people. And he's not in any trouble that I know of. But this is my favorite, this guy, Ed Burke, you may know of him, one of our most famous and powerful politicians. He reported to prison 2 weeks ago, and the headline, I love this, this is from The Wire, that they wiretapped. I need his favor, Burke, for my TIF money, said the developer, who's also part of this case. So Mr. Burke, who's served for over 50 years as the head of the Finance Committee, was in charge of every TIF that ever was created in the city of Chicago. That's how powerful and long-lived he was. And now he's in prison for that. Something to be super, super sensitive to. All right. All this was just by way of introduction. To get to the place which brought you to the meeting anyhow was what's going on in Orland Park, Tom? Come on. Don't make me wait. All right, let's talk about the TIFs of Orland Park and what do we know about them? We know there's one TIF that's been around for a while. It's called the Main Street Triangle TIF. It goes back a long time. It's been morphed a little bit, but that's your TIF, okay? And you know, you can see there's TIFs nearby. This is down in Tinley Park. You know, so you've got some TIFs in your surrounding area. Not a whole bunch of them, but this is your TIF. And this is what is from your city's website is what they want to do there. They want to create all kinds of things in this area. And so there's some renderings, you know, of kind of how it is, but how it wants to be. You know, they've got some names of things on here. So they've got some plans, you know, for that area. So it was created in 2004, so that's, you know, 20 years ago, right? It's supposed to expire in 2027. So unless we hear otherwise, in a few years this TIF will blink out of existence unless it is extended, which it could be. The property tax removed in 2023 was $1.5 million. So that's how much money didn't make it to those other units of government, just this one TIF.
There's no development there. How could they be lacking those taxes on property
That's how much money, that's how much property taxes were collected.
97.50 is apartment complex in the triangle.
The property taxes that were removed in 2022 was $1.8 million. The total that have been removed since that TIF was created is $15.6 million. Anybody ever hear that number before? No. Let the record reflect, we just made the news. Okay, so this is a number that I was able to deduce from the reports that your city must file. So it's not me making crap up. This is from a primary source that your city is required to file. But we'll get to that in a minute. In 2020, which is the latest report that we have, they also report $770,000 from private sources. You want to write this one down, Mohammed? What is the private sources? So we're going to try to keep track of some of these questions. The first question was, what did our TIF money buy? I think that was a question from the audience. First question is, what was created with the TIF money, or what is the outcome, or some questions of that nature, right? What did the TIF money buy, and then what is this $770,000? All right, the expenses in 2020 were $1.8 million, of which $1.2 million was for debt service. So right away, I want to know, what is the debt? It's usually for a bond. If you would please put that down as well. Debt, question mark. So if it was me, and if it was my money, I would like to see the term sheet of this bond. It should be easily explained. We took out $16 million in whatever year for the following reasons, and it will be paid off in whatever, 15 years, whatever that is. And in so paying this bond off, the bank will make so much in profit. And by the way, which bank? You should know this, right? Is this a bank that's in good standing with you? Or is it a snarky bank? Like for me, if it's Wells Fargo, my red lights go on because that's a criminal enterprise. So I hope your cities are doing business with Wells Fargo, but we don't know, until we do a little digging. And then the balance, this is one of the most strangest things I've ever discovered in all my years. I've been on this now 11 years. Like I say, this is my 246th meeting. The balance at the end of 2020 was minus $27 million. Now I have no understanding of what that means. Please write that down. What is $27 million deficit, question mark? So clearly something is happening, something is being built, or something is being financed, or something, and that caused a negative balance of $27 million. And it may be a perfectly simple explanation, but it's not obvious from anything that I could see. All right, so this is kind of what I've been able to discover for you from looking at the documents that I have. But here's something you have to know, people. There is no TIF annual report for 21, 22, or 23. So your village is out of compliance for 3 years. So I'm pulling information from the report that I have from my own research from 2020, which you can't find. So if it was up to you and you were tasked to do my job, there'd be nothing on the screen. You wouldn't know, you wouldn't have it. It's not available on the state or your village's website. These reports are not there. So I have the one from 2020 from my prior work, and that's how I'm telling you some of this. But there is nothing to tell us like the latest numbers. So at the end of 2023, is that 20 million, that deficit that I showed you, is that still on the books, or do they retire it, or what?
The question, what was the debt service for the other years, not just 2020?
Well, you're gonna have to get the reports to find that out.
They borrowed $90 million.
Yeah,
There's a lot of debt to pay off.
it is. So we
It doesn't go
put,
to administrative plan.
yeah,
It goes to pay off
put
debt.
that on the list. Get details of debt service, because I don't know. All right, the 2020 report shows that the $65 million in bond receipts, and another $31 million from private sources, which might be other bonds. So again, we're looking at maybe $90 million, like you pointed out, in bonds, where the details are vague or non-existent.
We're missing are 20, 22, 23, and 21.
Yeah, we don't know.
What about the other ones?
Yeah, we don't
What
know.
are those?
That's right.
Those are supposed to be filed and made available to the public.
Yeah, they're years out of date. I mean, they're non-compliant.
No, I'm asking about the previous years. You don't have that number up there.
I don't have it. I only have what I show you.
You can find 2020.
Well, that's all I have. I don't have 2019. They just don't exist.
What do you
Well,
mean they don't
filed
exist?
them then.
They're not exact. They're
3
not,
years that are missing.
they're not around. You can't find anything, only 2020 that I have personally. There's no other reports anywhere.
If we were filing, and we're not at, obviously 21, 22, and 23, they haven't been filed.
No.
So obviously, we realize from other public reports that the state our finances have not been filed by the village.
Right.
The prior administration, for 100 and whatever, has filed them from what I'm understanding.
They may well have.
Okay, well,
But we don't have them. They're not on the city's website, and they're not on the state's website. I have filed a FOIA request with the Village of Orland Park to get at least the last 3 years that are supposed to be filed, and they haven't replied yet.
They don't respond to any FOIA requests.
Well, I'll let you know,
Yeah.
or the sponsors of this presentation will let you know via email if they respond to the FOIA. But if you're interested, I advise you to stick with Mohammed after this meeting and stay involved, because what you might want to do is FOIA the annual reports of those prior years that go all the way back to 2002. They should be somewhere.
so help me understand, because you're throwing out a lot of things, and I have a lot of questions. But the one primary thing is, aren't monies generated from the new development used to pay off the bonds
Yes.
that oftentimes are created in order to fund the infrastructure improvements and things that the village has requested be a part of that
Yes.
development?
Yes.
Okay, so they're not giving a blank check, they're basically investing in that piece of property with a set series of monies. And then whatever is developed, that whatever revenues derived from that go back into to pay down the debt. And if I'm not mistaken, and
Mhm.
again, I don't know for a fact, but what I've understood is that the previous, like the 9750, that particular apartment complex that was part of the staple of what was developed at 143rd LaGrange has already been paid off.
So the question is, how does the village get the money to give to the developer to make the project happen? And the answer is usually a bond. You take a loan, so that the city doesn't have $2 million lying around to give to Tresser Development. So yeah, they take a loan, they give the loan to me, I build my thing. The TIF collects all the property tax like I showed you for 23 years, and part of what they do is pay back the bond. But what if a couple of things can happen? What if the project goes south and it doesn't succeed?
Bonds are guaranteed by property taxes.
So the project may go south, but you're still on the hook for the bond, so you gotta pay it off regardless. That's one thing. Second thing is, what happens if it's a very successful project, like I mentioned in my earlier remarks, and the developer sells that whole thing, he walks away with his profit and the TIF money. So we act as a banker for developers. That's how this thing works. Now, that could be, you could say, look, I got no problem with that. It's like magic beans. Except I've also showed you that every time you create a TIF, there are losers. So regardless of what happens inside the TIF district, whether it's virtuous or not, there are losers here. And part of what you have to decide is the balance. Do you want to rob Peter to pay Paul? Now, the TIF goes on for 23 years, so even if this project is fantastic and it's paid off in 3 or 4 years, you still got another 19 years. So more projects can happen as long as it's inside the TIF district. That's called mission creep, and this is universally true for all TIFs. It's not as if we build a thing and then, sunset the TIF and everyone goes their own way. No, the TIF trundles on, and now a new mayor comes in and they have their own plans, and again, you have to struggle to keep up with all this. I've made this my calling to try to give you these details, but imagine you trying to figure this out from your living room.
So the failure to file in
Yeah.
21, 22, and 23 for our municipal requirements will at some point affect our bond rating. So when S&P or a Moody's says, the village comes to them and says, yeah, we want to put out a new bond for our new TIF, and they say, well, geez, you haven't filed in 3 years, we're going to do an audit, and then find out, oh, wait, we're going to raise your rate. What was a premium rate of an A2 or what, A plus or whatever, now you're a B or a minus minus, you're going to now pay more.
That's right.
In interest associated with that bond.
Yeah. So this
So
is
we're
a, this
losing
is the,
in that respect.
this would be the cost of doing bad business in this scenario. You, the taxpayers, will then be paying more for that money. This is a potential consequence. And there are other obvious consequences for not paying, for not filing. All right. There's also an item for 2020 that said additional amount deposited in something called the Special Tax Allocation Fund of about $2 million. And I've never heard that language before. So again, what does that mean? I can't answer that. I'm just reporting to you what is on this document that no one can have. I just happen to have it in 2020. So you're privy, in a way, to public civic knowledge that actually nobody has. There's nobody. That no reporter has it, no academic person has it, and maybe the people at City Hall, maybe they have it. But now you have it. You're
Tom,
welcome.
just clarify one thing. How much money above the base would be sitting in that fund that doesn't go to governments? And do we know what happened to it?
No, I mean, we know that this is the total removed in all those 19 years was about $16 million. And there was a negative balance of this crazy number. The balance was negative 27 million.
So they're borrowing to do other things
I
in
don't-
addition.
I couldn't answer you. I just never seen this. I've looked at hundreds and hundreds of TIF reports. I've never seen this before.
And that's money that if it didn't exist, our property taxes wouldn't have gone up.
Well, as Fritz Kagi has demonstrated, at least there's a 15% inflation on you countywide. Now, you may get an extra inflation because of all this nonsense. But I don't have the ability to say that. But I just know Fritz Kagi says it's 15% for everybody.
Right.
TIFs don't affect property taxes in surrounding areas.
Say what?
TIFs do not affect property taxes in surrounding areas.
They absolutely do.
Property taxes only go up due to property value assessment. Property values go up, then your property taxes go up. The village, they can't just arbitrarily raise everyone else's taxes for no reason.
It's not arbitrary. It's the units of government jacking their rates up that are used to calculate your property tax. They inch up.
In other words,
So
According to
when
Fritz
you show-
Kagi, 15%. This is your county assessor.
That's an estimate on his part, that's not.
No, you're
that's not
incorrect, sir. The county assessor has asserted it's a 15% inflation on your tax.
So when you showed us the tax bill for Orland Park, you
Yeah.
you gave an example of one. The village gets their budget and then says, wow, we have to raise our request. In addition to whatever our property taxes go up, the village is now wanting more money.
It's the same argument that Fritz is explaining. You only have one TIF. It's not that big, but it is something. And it is taking money off the table that is not available to the units of government to tax. So the inflation may be modest here, but it's not zero. And across the whole county, it's 15%. This is from the county assessor. All right. So what's missing here? Not just the TIF reports, but your financials for 2 years, 22 and 23. This is from the Treasurer Mendoza's website. They're missing. There's a little X here. So that means your village has not filed their CAFAs, their audits, their massive sort of annual reports to tell you, how the village is doing for 2 years. So there's the headline: delinquent financial reporting puts Orland Park at risk of forced audit. Well, that's not a risk. Now you're under a forced audit from the state. And this is the letter from Comptroller Mendoza to your village explaining that they're in default and they must comply and get their books in order. This is a letter from the accountant that was hired by the village to comply with what the state must see. And he's saying it's expected by October 31st, which is tomorrow. So we'll let you know. You know, the sponsors of this meeting, if you signed up, please do sign up if you came in late. It's very important that we know who you are, so they can be in communication with you about this important work. Right? Are they going to be in compliance? Are they late? Is it? Do you want a copy of this? We'll send it to you. You know, when it's available. You should take the time to educate yourself. It's your village. It's your money.
And that's one audit for tomorrow, not
Stu.
the second audit.
Yeah. It says here.
The second is it's
Yeah, it
2025.
says here for the 22nd and 23, the audit for the year ended 22. So it's 1 year. So there'll be another letter presumably to tell us, you know, the second year, maybe another month or so. We don't know, but stay in communication with the organizers. All right, so now we're getting to this home stretch. We're almost done. What is on the table right now? What are we here really to debate? I mean, all this is just your homework. I'm sorry if it went on long, but I think hopefully you'll agree with me that you kind of got a good knowledge, a good foundation to tackle the question that's really on the table. That's is really what has brought us here today. So what is on the table is Orland Park studies 3 new TIFs to spur development. As Mayor Keith Pekau says, the details are far from done. So this is fairly recent reporting, and it includes this piece of property that's known as the former Andrew Corp headquarters. So there's 3 different properties that are being discussed, I suppose, or proposed. And it says, this is from the Southtown, it says, Orland Park officials are considering the creation of 3 new TIF districts in an effort to spur development on properties including the former Andrew Corp headquarters and factory, according to village documents and the mayor. So this is the reporting that we have. And this is also reporting from The Real Deal, which covers real estate. And it says, JD Real Estate and Orland Park Lake Ventures are seeking public funding for development. So there's 2 players that are now named from reporting. One is called JD Real Estate, and the other is called Orland Park Lake Ventures. Okay, we know, now we're getting somewhere. 2 large businesses want to do something in your village with these 3 properties. Okay, we're moving down the path. This is all we have on these 3 projects. This is from West 153rd Street, so it's kind of a rendering of what looks like, you know, homes. You know, they're connected, you know, like 2 at a time. But there's no real details on this or the other 2 properties. It's just, the language is called mixed use, retail and residential.
That's what they built.
No, this is what they're talking about.
No, but those don't exist now, correct?
No, as far as I know, this is what's being proposed.
Right.
So that is Andrew Corporation property.
That looks like Andrew. Okay, so this is what they're saying they imagine will be there. But that's all the details. We don't have a budget for it. We don't have any, you know, like, what do they look like or anything. So maybe those documents exist. Part of my FOIA was trying to unearth some more details. Like, are there more detailed site plans for the other 2 TIFs so that you can understand, you know, is they're building a movie theater, a bowling alley, or what? I mean, you should know this. It should be well out in the open if they're this far along in their process. However, we can tell you that the developers, JD Real Estate, has given the mayor $10,000 in 2 separate campaign contributions, and Edwards Real Estate company that's involved in the other development has given $7,800 to the mayor in 8 donations. So that's a total of $17,800 in tasty campaign treats for your mayor. Hopefully, you're not going to be burdened with the tricks in the spirit of the season.
Is Edwards Realty a subsidiary of JLL?
No, there's two separate developers are involved in this project. JLL is one, and Edwards is a separate company. So this is not illegal, you know, in the state of Illinois. It's a perfectly acceptable, or I should say, common practice for people who are receiving gifts of public money to give campaign contributions to the people who are distributing this public money. I think it's a conflict of interest. Call me crazy. But you should know it as taxpayers, because you might say, does it cloud the water? Does it muddy the water? You know, is this really a good thing, a good deal for you, the taxpayers, or not? You know, you decide. All right, so what we say is, what is missing, so this is the FOIA request that's on the city's website that I asked for. The language here is, I say, please send me the TIF annual reports and any operational and functioning TIF districts in Orland Park from 21, 22, and 23. These annual reports are required by Illinois law.
What about 2002?
No, I didn't ask for those. I'm just asking for the missing ones. You guys should do that.
Information on the whole TIF?
Yeah, you guys should do that. So, you know, form a committee and get busy. I'm just trying to get the latest years.
3 years on a 23-year TIF is a very small sample of information.
But it's
Well,
at the high end of the,
It'll give you all the cumulative numbers, so it'll bring you up to date. If you want more details, I invite you to file a FOIA and do it yourself.
What was their response?
You're perfectly capable of doing it, and I think you should do it, but that's just me. And then the other thing I said is, give me all reports issued to Orland Park by S.P. Friedman Development Corporation, that's the consultant that created the background to make these TIFs possible, you know, in the three areas proposed by the village. So if they comply, I can share with you, if you're interested, these documents, should they come forward. And if you want more, go get them.
But they have a specific amount of time to honor your request.
Right, so
What-
somebody said at the beginning that the village is famous for ignoring TIF.
Yeah,
Yes.
FOIAs.
5 days, 90 days, something like that.
So where we are now is they requested extra time, and again, they're entitled to do so. And then I'll let you know, or the organizers will let you know via email if they send another email, or, you know, we'll just check back on this website, and at some point it'll either say, here's the data, you know, emailed, or they'll say, I don't know, we want more time, or
It's too voluminous.
it's too voluminous, we can't find it, the records don't exist. Now, if that happens, you're in a conundrum. I mean, we're in a kind of a gray zone of the law, like, you're supposed to have the documents, well, the mayor could say, look, well, there was a fire, or you know, it's the predecessor, it's not my fault. I mean, there could be a lot of that, but let's cross that bridge when we get to it. I'm gonna presume that somebody has these documents somewhere in their garage, in the city hall closet, something. Yes, sir?
What is the penalty for not having these documents?
Good question. Very little. Very weak penalties. I couldn't tell you actually what the statute says, but I know it can't be a big deal, otherwise, I don't know what. They come and close your town down or something, I don't know. But obviously, the penalties are not significant, clearly. Because you're not the only town. There are 34 other villages or municipalities in the state of Illinois that haven't produced paperwork for 1, 2, or 3 years, and as far as I know, they're still, you know, business as usual. The TIFs are now, if it was me, again, this is for you to decide, and you can raise some hell with your state representative and your state senator to say, this is not okay. I want to see some law change, that if the town doesn't produce its paperwork, the TIF is frozen. You may not proceed. You can't take my money and spend it, and you don't tell me about it. That's not okay. Regardless of what you think about TIFs, this is just basic government 101. And so it would be so for not your village, but the 33 other villages that are, you know, Harvey and Cicero. I mean, there's some serious stuff going on in other cities. That would, you know, were we in those cities, we would be saying the same thing. People would be going like, where's all my information? What are the penalties? Okay, so we'll let you know the results of this. And we can't find any TIF annual reports from Orland Park. So here's, again, this is the controls website, and you can't see this it says 23, 22, there's a little X. Now the controls website is only 3 years. So if we were to go back in time, and this was 2020, you would see 20, 19, and 18. To your point, sir, you would see these reports here, I presume. I don't know. But the controller's site only gives you 3 years. So maybe she has them, you know, in her cloud somewhere, But as far as the public goes, when you get to this place, on her data warehouse website, you can only see 3 years, 24, 23, and 22. The 24 reports aren't gonna be available until the summer anyway, so this, don't ignore this one, but these 2 years should be here.
And our Freedom of Information Act can also be requested to the controller.
You could. Yeah, that's a good point. You could send to her office and just say, you must have, don't you? I mean, that would be my surmise if you want to try that. You could go 2 ways. You can send a FOIA to her and send a FOIA to your village and try to get what the gentleman was asking for, or all those reports going all the way back. Okay, missing in action. So final thought is, it's creating 3 new TIFs in a town that has not been reporting its required financial data for 3 years is scary. It's scary, people. That concludes my presentation. I now turn the floor back to Mohammed to run questions and answers. While I get something to do.
So,
Mohammed, can you come up and you can run the question and answers? I gotta get something to do.